Hey guys, I'm Chad Hoover and welcome to today's video where I'm going to teach you how to fish some big old worms for some big old bass. Fish on! All right, so in a recent video, I hooked up with Jan Polo Amendola, who won a kayak in a Hoffa Spot tournament. And so as soon as that video released, people started asking questions about fishing big worms. And I realized I had missed the opportunity to talk about how to catch big bass on big worms. But I was really excited about him winning his kayak. He was super stoked about fishing in his new kayak. So I kind of got lost in the moment and just enjoyed the trip. And I didn't really get into how to fish big worms for big bass, and especially in dirty water. So we're going to talk about that right now. First and foremost, the number one thing that I see guys do wrong or gals do wrong when it comes to fishing big worms is they use the wrong rod, or actually soft plastics in general. What I've got here is I've got a loose reel. I've got a St. Croix rod that's basically a 7'1" medium heavy, but it's an extra fast. Now, I like a fast or extra fast for fishing soft plastics. I'll talk about why in just a minute, but I want to walk you through the setup. When I'm fishing worms, I like a little bit shorter handle where I can move it and not catch it on my PFD or catch it on my sleeve, because I don't really fish a worm or a soft plastic with two hands. What I like to do is I like to take the plastic, I like to make a long cast, and then I let the lure hit the bottom, and I really fish it with one hand by putting my finger up the back of the blank, which allows me to have that little bit of extra sensitivity. Sometimes I split my ring finger and my middle finger. Sometimes I split my ring finger and my pinky, depending on how I want to hold the reel, the size of the reel, and things like that. But for the most part, I'm going to split it. And then what I like to do is what I call the flick and roll, which is meaning I'm going to flick that star drag right there, okay? And I'm going to finger roll, and I'm going to basically drag that bait along until the rod's almost vertical, and I'm going to lower the rod down, and I'm going to let that line lay on the water. More often than not, what I'm doing with the worm is I'm watching the line. You'll hear old men or old timers or guys with a lot of experience that fish worms call themselves line watchers. And if you're fishing a worm correctly, you're a line watcher. You're either watching that line jump when the fish hits it on the fall, or when it's on the bottom, you're watching that line start to move, even though you don't get that telltale tap, tap. A lot of times they'll just swim up and they'll pick the worm up. And if you don't see that line moving and you don't drop that rod tip and give them a little bit of slack, they're going to feel you before you feel them. You set the hook, but they haven't had that chance to suck the rest of that worm in. We'll talk about that when we talk about hooking the worm up. But again, the way I like to fish a worm is I really just like to make a cast out. As soon as it hits the water, I just pull off a rod's length worth of line, let it hit the bottom, lay that line on the water, and then I take up my slack. That gives me one free hand to paddle if you're a kayak fisherman. But even if you're fishing from a boat, literally, this forces you to slow down. Just turn the reel handle with your middle finger. You can do this even if you got them tiny little Burger King commercial hands, if you know what I'm talking about. And just drag your worm along real slow, okay? And you really only want to move the rod down to about, 10 o'clock to about 11 o'clock. If you go too far down when the fish hits it, you got nowhere to go. And if you go too far up and the fish hits it, you're up against the wall before you set the hook. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but let's talk about this setup right now. What, when, where, why, how. I hate it when tip videos are not comprehensive, so please do me a favor. Watch this entire video, because there's a lot of stuff in this video that you're going to want to know to put together a real comprehensive soft plastics creature bait. Strategies work really well, but for this video we're going to talk about worms. And the reason we're going to talk about worms is in dirty water. And dirty water is really prominent in the summertime because you get a lot of summer storms, you get a lot of runoff, you get a lot of mud. A lot of times there's construction going on in the summertime that's not necessarily going on in the wintertime upstream. All of that leads to us fishing a lot of muddy water in the summertime. There's algae blooms, there's all kinds of things that inhibit water visibility in the summertime. So fishing dirty water is something I'm going to talk about a lot in this video. So let's talk about fishing worms, okay? Worms have almost become one of those patterns that are stale. What I mean by that is they're really effective, but because there's so many other flashy things going on, we've all almost forgotten about the good old-fashioned worm. One of my favorite brands of worm out there is Culprit. I really love Yamamoto plastics. For the sake of this video, I'm going to be using Zoom worms, mostly because that's what I have with me, because I left my monster bass worm box at the house. But if I'm fishing for really big bass in deep water in the summertime, you almost can't beat a Culprit 12-inch worm. and you almost can't beat it in black. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to walk you through a couple of worms. We're going to start with the line and the hook first. I'm a big fan of just using an improved clinch knot because I want that tag to be sticking off the side. I don't want it to be sticking forward, and I don't want to get crazy. I want it to be real easy to tie. I fish big worms a lot at night in the summertime, so I like a knot that's easy to tie. An improved clinch is really easy to tie. You just wrap it around the line 6 times, go back through the hole you made, and back through the hole you made with that loop. Wet it, cinch it down, and clip it off. I'll do another video to talk about that. In fact, there's a lot of how to tie knot videos on my channel, so you can look at my playlist for that. But for this video, by and large, I'm going to fish a extra wide gap mustad hook called the grip pin hook. So these are soft plastic grip pin hooks in the KVD series. And I like that grip pin because it's going to allow that bait to stay in place. Let me show you how you rig this. For the most part right now, I'm fishing these 10-inch June bug worms. That is really versatile. So all you're going to do to set this thing up is you're going to grab the tip of the worm and you're going to come in as perpendicular as you can. And it's real simple. Go down until you hit the transition of the hook. If you go any further, you're going to have plastic past it, so when the weight hits it, it's going to crank the worm up and make it hard to rig. If you don't go in far enough, the hook eye is going to stick out and then the worm's going to tear really easily. So again, just go down right to the transition, and you're going to want to turn and make that come out right 90 degrees, just like that. Otherwise, the hook is not going to lay in there perfect. Another thing, I hear people all the time talking about wetting their line. When you're putting a hook through a soft plastic, take the time and wet that hook. You can use water. I like to use saliva. It slides a little better, because you also don't want this worm to tear as it goes across this grip keeper right there. If you guys can see that little grip keeper, that's what makes these grip pin hooks grip pin hooks. So you're going to push that worm and just push it up and roll it and turn it. And then that little grip pin is going to sit on the outside of the worm, and that is your system. Now, I'm a big fan of worms being rigged straight, soft plastics being straight, unless it's a fluke and I put a little belly in it to get it to dart and seek the surface. So the way that I accomplish that is I actually just let the worm, I grab the line with my inside of my hand, let that worm lay natural, and then I pinch it with my finger so that I know where the hook needs to come through. Then I bend that, put the little kink in it, and again, I want to go through that worm at a 90-degree angle. If you come through it at an angle like this, you're not going to be able to skin it right. So you're going to want to go through it at a 90-degree angle, just like that. And when you come out, that hook should almost lay perfect. If you notice, it's got a slight little belly in it. And I do it that way on purpose because when I take it and push it forward and skin it, which is called texposing it or skinning it, then that worm's going to lay nice and clean. Now, there's several different ways to fish worms. For the most part, we're going to refer to hard bottom, soft bottom, and grass. It's the 3 categories that I'm going to talk about here. If I'm fishing grass, I want this grip pin hook. I want an extra wide gap hook. If I'm fishing naked bottom, if I'm fishing zebra mussels, if I'm fishing mud, then I'm going to go to more of your traditional long shank worm hook, and we'll talk about that in just a second when we talk about hook selection. By and large, if I can get away with it, I'm going to fish a 3/0. I'm going to go up to a 4/0 for bigger worms, and I'm going to go down to a 2/0 for smaller worms. In muddy water, I want the darkest color I can get. June bug is really good because a lot of times it's got a little flash in it. So here's my rule of thumb. If the sun is shining and I got muddy water, I'm going to fish June bug with flash. If the sun's not shining and I got muddy water, I'm fishing solid black. If you only have one color to fish, fish solid black, because black even works in clear water with the sun high. Honestly, when you start fishing black lures, you'll never fish anything else in muddy water because it's deadly effective. But when I'm fishing varying conditions, I really like this June bug with the different color glitter in it, because when the sun comes out, it just gives it a little bit of flash. I'm going to fish as light a weight as I can get away with to get the worm to the bottom, not punch into the mud for muddy bottom, and not punch down into the grass. So when you have your weight fall to the bottom and that weight isn't pegged and it goes down into the grass, it just makes it hard to fish. So we can talk about pegging while we're here talking about it. All a peg is a little rubber thing. They come in a bag like this. Mr. Peg is one of them. A lot of different companies make them. The way that you peg your weight is to just stick that rubber thing through there. You pull it. When you get the amount of tension that you want, you just clip it off with your line clippers on both sides, and then you slide that worm down and it stays right against that. I'm a big fan of, in any case, with the exception of where I absolutely have to peg the weight, I don't peg it. Meaning, I want that weight to fall free. I want it to hit the bottom first, and then as I reel my line down, that worm comes down to it. But also, when that bass comes in, even with a light weight, when it picks that worm up, I want it to be able to swim away and not feel that weight. We'll talk about that a little bit more when I start talking about fishing a heavier weight. So if I'm fishing mud bottom and I'm fishing grass, I want as light a weight as I can get away with and still feel the worm, because again, you're going to be line watching. Might as well talk about it now. If I'm going to fish hard bottom, I'm fishing as heavy a weight as I can get away with that doesn't inhibit my hook set. By and large, when you're fishing grass, you're fishing pinpoint. So you have a good idea where the fish are going to be. You're fishing a particular part of the grass bed. You're fishing an edge, so you're letting your weight fall down. When you're fishing open water, when you're fishing hard bottom, for the most part, you're fishing for pelagic fish that are roaming. You're trying to cover a lot of water, so I don't want to sit there and wait 45 seconds to a minute for that weight to hit the bottom. I want to make as long a cast as I can, so that's why the heavy weight comes in. And I want to keep contact with the bottom. I want to be able to do my finger roll, bump the rod, let the worm sit for a second, drop my rod tip back, watch my line, take up my slack, bump, 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 put a little slack in it, watch and wait, reel up my slack, and keep going. So weight selection is real simple for me. Grass and mud, I'm fishing as light a weight as I can get away with, because I don't want that weight to punch down into the mud or punch down into that grass and cause me to hang up. Hard bottom, zebra mussel, scattered rock, chunk rock, and even wood on a hard bottom, I'm fishing as heavy a weight as I can get away with. That way I can keep bottom contact. When that fish hits it, again, I don't like to peg it. I drop my rod tip, I wait for it to swim away with it, I reel down and I set the hook. Heavy weight, hard bottom, just remember that they both start with an H. If you go, man, what'd that fat guy say I needed to do for the hard bottom? Hard bottom, heavy. That's all you got to remember. That's a little mnemonic device that'll make it easy, but intuitively, it should make sense to you. You don't want that heavy weight to punch down in the grass. We're not punching with the worm. You're gonna do that more with a compact creature bait. That's a whole nother video, but we're talking about worm fishing. And the reason that we're talking about worm fishing, this is one of the most deadly effective techniques for covering water. This bait has a big profile. When you're in stained water, those fish are hugging the bottom and they're tight to cover. So it's gonna be right there in their face. Got a lot of movement when you have a big ribbon tail like we've got here. The bait displaces a lot of water, but with that dark color, it's going to show up really well in that stained water. Light colors, if you go to a lake with a lot of milfoil and the muddy water, and you start trying to fish a brown color or a green pumpkin that matches it, the bait is not going to contrast. I fish my green pumpkins and my browns over like sand bottom, over clay bottom, over something to where when that bait is laying on that bottom or laying on that grass, it really contrasts. When hydrilla starts to die, I'll fish a green pumpkin because it sticks out against it. But when hydrilla is really in bloom, or when milfoil is really in bloom, that color is not going to stick out. My two favorite colors for that is going to be my red shad with a black back, or that June bug. And again, part of what's going to make it show up is the big profile of these 10 and even these 12-inch worms. The other thing that's really going to make it show up is that dark color, okay? So we've talked about that. We've talked about the rod. We've talked about the reel. We've talked about the line. We've talked a little bit about hook selection. I really like the wide gap hooks because they're short and compact. I get a lot more hook penetration on these bigger worms when the fish eats it, because there's room for that worm to be compressed and still hook it. And I'll show you why I choose not to fish your standard worm hook unless I'm going to step up to a bigger one with my bigger baits. So let's take this big worm and let's rig it with a standard offset worm hook, okay? Got a 12-inch bait. Going to go down there just to the transition like we talked about. You're going to come out. You're going to go up over the top like that. You're going to take this hook. You're going to measure. You're going to go through it. And then when that bass grabs it, there's not a lot of room for that plastic to get out of the way, okay? So it inhibits your hook set. It inhibits that fish getting hooked effectively. And then I really like the way that this extra wide gap hook, when it hits something, it comes up over it. It keeps that bait from binding up. And so I really like fishing a standard offset worm hook on like a really small worm, a 4-inch worm, a 5-inch worm. But once I get to that 7.5-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, or even a little bit bigger worm, I'm going to try to go to an extra wide gap hook. And sometimes, and I got this on here for this very reason, I even like to go to these oversized. In this case, this is an 8/0. You're going to look at me like I got a unicorn horn growing out of my head when I tell you this, but I'm going to show you what it looks like. When I'm fishing these mega worms and I'm fishing deep water, I really like to have these 8/0 big mouth tube hooks, and I'm going to show you the two reasons why I like it. For one, I like to have a little bit more hook in the bait. I like the ability to run that thing up on there just like so, okay? And if you notice there, I actually left the eye sticking out just a little bit, and I'm gonna show you why I do that in just a second. I like to line that bait up. I like to do that right there. But I really like to skin that thing nice because I can get it down in those rock piles. And I like to take a rattle and stick it in this big fat part of the worm so it puts off some sound. I like to soak this thing in some scent so I can throw it out there. And I'll dead stick a big worm like this as long as 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. I've actually taken a phone call before, set a worm down, and 2.5 minutes later had the line just start swimming off because I forgot I even had it sitting out there. I'm gonna pull one of these a little bit bigger weights out. This is a 1/2 ounce weight. And I'm gonna show you exactly why I like to take and have this this hook shank right there at the edge. Because when you take a tungsten weight, you add a rattle to the thorax part of that body. But then when you snap that worm, if you want to hop it up and let it fall back, that tungsten clicks against that hook. That worm rattles inside it. You get that double clicking action. Sounds like bait fish feeding. It sounds like a fish eating crawfish. And it is just deadly effective. If you want to add one more little sense of realism to that, what I like to do, you guys may have seen my organization videos in the past, I like to use beads. And the way that I don't have to dig through that thing to find beads is I put them all, I do the same thing with swivels, and I do the same thing with my, my drop shot hooks, is I use a safety pin. So you take that thing, take one of those little beads, you put it on the line, and then you've got a bead that's clicking the hook shank, and the tungsten weight is clicking the bead. That thing draws fish in, and I can't tell you how many times I've made a long cast, let the weight hit the bottom, snap, snap, give it some slack and let it sit there, watch my line start moving, drop my rod tip, set the hook, and cross the eyes of a big fish. In fact, about 2 years ago, I caught one of the biggest bass I've caught in the last 10 years. It was an almost 11 pounder. Let's cut to a picture of that fish right now. And you'll see in that video, it's got a big 12-inch culprit worm laying right down the side of its face. And that's exactly how I caught that fish. I know that a lot of you guys are watching this video to learn how to fish a worm. And I know a lot of people don't consider big worms a real prominent tactic anymore, and especially not a big fish tactic. I don't talk about this in a lot of my videos, but I've caught well over 100 fish over 10 pounds. And part of the reason I don't talk about it is I had a bunch of photos that I lost, so I don't have evidence of every single one of them. But I've caught a lot in the last 10 years. And so of those over 100, like 139 bass over 10 pounds, like 65 of them have come on a monster worm. So when you want to talk about deadly effective, a jig has accounted for more than anything else, but a big worm has accounted for them when the jig bite is even slow, because the jig is compact, it doesn't displace as much water, the profile's not as big. If you want to fish for lethargic bass in the summertime, lethargic bass in the wintertime, if you want to fish deep water, if you want to fish shallow water, I take that bait right there and tie it on and fish it in lily pads and swim it across the top. I throw it out weightless and let the weight of that hook make it fall around docks. It is just a very versatile bait, but there probably isn't a more versatile, prolific big bass snatcher than a big old worm. But you got to think about what you're doing when you rig it. I'm going to talk about one more rigging technique, and then I'm going to go back to my line, my leader, my reel, and my rod setup so we can finish this thing with a big bang. Dark colors in dark water, lighter colors in clearer water, and then also if the sun's up high, I'm going to use a little bit more natural color. If the sun's low, I'm going to use a darker color. And depending on the vegetation or the bottom, I'm going to try to do the best I can to contrast that. If you had one color to pick, I would say that June bug with a little bit of fleck in it is probably your most universal all around. It'll still do really well in clear water, but when that water's stained, that dark color shows up really well. One of my favorite all-time colors is this California 420 color. That thing is green with red fleck in it. You know, everybody knows that red really disappears after about 6 feet, but that fleck still reflects. And so to me, that worm right there has produced a ton of big fish. But let me show you a rig that I've modified that's really just a, you know, this rig got popular a couple years ago. I resisted using it, and I still resist using it for what it's primarily used for. But I'm going to show you a little rig that I started using to fish big worms, and that's your Tokyo rig. And so a lot of people fish the Tokyo rig. They put a weight on the end of it, and they put their worm on there. I'm going to show you how I fish it. I like to take this 7.5 to 10 inch June bug worm, and then I like to just rig it like I told you before. Come in like that, roll that hook on there, okay? You're gonna take it, you're gonna rig it like you normally do. But now is the juicy part. You're gonna tie your main line to the swivel, and then you've got this dropper that makes a Tokyo rig a Tokyo rig. Well, tungsten weights are probably the best, but they're really expensive. And the way that I like to fish my Tokyo rig is I either get a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce, just cheap old water gremlin lead weight. And then what you're supposed to do with a Tokyo rig is you're supposed to take the weight and you slide it on there, and then you bend that so that the weight doesn't come off. Let me show you what I like to do. I like to take this thing, that way I can throw it in wood, I can throw it in the nastiest stuff out there, and I like to take my pliers, which I always have in my PFD, and I just like to put enough of a bend in there, about like that, to where that bullet weight doesn't come off. But if I hang up on something, all I've got to do is give it a good pull, and that weight will straighten out. I don't lose my $3.50 Tokyo rig trying to save my 2-cent sinker. So it's sacrificial. I know there's a lot of controversy, and some people are going to say, you're leaving the lead in the water, Chad, and all that good stuff. So be sure to check your local regulations. If you have to, put tungsten on here, fold it over so you don't lose it. But to me, this is deadly effective. I use this thing in some of the thickest grass out there. I use it on a mud bottom, so that way when this hits, the worm is still up high. I'll shake it, I'll drag it, I'll basically do everything in between. But I really like to take a worm and dead stick it, let that Tokyo weight hit the bottom, dead stick it, that worm's up off the bottom, and honestly just shake it. So yeah, I sort of fish it like a Tokyo rig, but I really fish it like I'm just dropping a Texas rig along the bottom, and I'm almost using this like a Lindy rig, dragging it along. But I also really like the fact that this thing breaks free if I get it into wood, if I get it into zebra mussel, if I get it into something that it hangs up on. So the big 3 takeaways for me is use as big a worm as you can get away with. Use the appropriate hook. In other words, if you're going to use a medium-sized worm, use a medium-sized hook. If you're fishing grass, if you're fishing mud, then I like an extra wide gap hook. If I'm fishing over hard bottom and I have to go to a straight shank hook, I'm going to go to a little bit bigger one, so I've got that compression. But for the most part, I fish a mustad grip pin hook in every situation I can, unless I'm forced to fish a straight shank or an offset shank worm hook. Again, if I'm fishing it weightless, weedless, and I'm throwing it up into shallow grass, then I'll go to that lower profile so that it comes through there a little bit easier and it doesn't have that big a keel on it. But guys, the way I fish my worms is pretty straightforward. As light a weight as I can get away with on soft bottom or grass. As heavy a weight, remember if it's hard, go heavy. As hard bottom, I'm going to be covering more bottom. I want to make longer casts. I want that weight to get there faster, and I want to be in contact with it. I'm almost going to fish it like a Carolina rig. I'm going to bump, bump, bump. I'm going to hold my rod off to the side, and when that fish takes it, I'm going to give back a little bit. I'm going to reel down, and I'm going to make a sweeping hook set. Again, I like an extra fast or fast worm. What I want to do is take you guys over to the water real fast, and I'm going to show you exactly how I fish a worm. All right, guys, so for the purpose of demonstrating this, I decided to not get in the kayak. So if you're a long-time subscriber, and if you've been here for a while, you know that I'm primarily a kayak fisherman. I wanted to make this video universal because worm fishing is deadly effective no matter how you fish. So fishing from the bank, it's even really effective. So really the way I fish a worm is I make a long cast, and then as soon as the lure hits the water, I pull off about what I imagine is the length of rod worth of line. And then I'm going to lay my line on the water, and I'm just going to watch it first. I'm not going to do any retrieving. I'm not going to do anything other than watch the line that I lay on the water. And that's why I'm a big fan of braided line to a leader, because that braided line lays right on the surface. If I see that line start to swim off, I can reel down. If the fish are swimming with the lure, set the hook the opposite direction. If they're swimming right, set to the left. If they're swimming left, set to the right. That'll always, almost always anyway, get you a good corner of the mouth hook set. So anyway, then what I want to do is I want to point my rod at about 10 o'clock. I'm going to grip it to where I've got my finger up the back, so I've got a lot of increased feel. And all I'm going to do is slowly shake drag it, is what I call it. That way I can feel for anything that I run into. Now, I talked about early in the video why I like an extra fast or fast rod, but let me tell you while I'm doing this why I like that. If I bump the lure into something like a log or a rock, if I've got a moderate or a moderate slow, a rod that's a parabolic bend, and I start to pull it to get it up over that cover, that rod's gonna bend, 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 and just about the time that lure breaks free, that rod's gonna snap up and it's gonna shoot that lure up and wrap it around a tree limb or rock, and it's gonna tangle up. If you fish a fast or extra fast rod, that tip deflects a little bit less. You feel that lure, you got a little bit more or you feel that lure touching something, you got a little bit more sensitivity. If it feels like it's not gonna come free easy, you can drop your rod tip, reel up a little slack, you can do the finger roll, and you can pull, and then when it hops off of it, that rod only does that, which makes that lure just hop up a little bit and then set on the bottom. Fish it through treetops really easy. You can fish it through zebra mussel fields. You can fish it through chunk rock. You can even fish it through grass. So the number one takeaway from this video is that if you're fishing a moderate or a slow action rod, fishing worms, you are probably losing fish. You're probably not feeling fish, and you're probably hanging up way more than you would be if you'd fish an extra fast or a fast jig and worm style rod. So again, I'm just gonna drag. And then when I get to the point where I'm about 11 o'clock, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna line watch. Good 15, 20, 30 seconds. I know that seems like an eternity, but count it out in your head until you get used to what that pause needs to look like. Now from here, again, I don't put my hand on the reel when I'm fishing a worm until I hook a fish. I know that sounds crazy, but it's a way that it keeps me honest. And so what I do is I use my finger on the star drag or on the reel handle. I take up my slack as I'm going down. Again, I'm watching my line. If a fish happens to hit it right as I'm pointing the rod at it, I will click the bell open and I'll let it take line. I'll watch where it's going and I'll reel down and I'll set the hook. So you gotta focus. Worm fishing is very concentration intense if you're doing it right. If you're just throwing it out, letting it hit the bottom and snatching it and reeling it, you're really not getting the benefit out of worm fishing. So again, I'm just gonna bump that lure along when I feel something. Again, if I feel like I can get it over it without getting way back behind my head, then I'll go ahead and pull it free like right there. And then a lot of times I'll just catch back up by just flicking that, okay? If you're about right here and a fish hits it and you see it swimming off, what I'll do is I'll lower my rod tip and I call it point, flick, and stick. Here's how that works. I point my rod tip at the fish, I flick the thing to take up the slack, and then I stick it. And when I stick it, then I'm on the reel handle and I'm leveraging and fighting the fish. Point it, flick it, stick it, slow way down when it comes to catching fish on worms. Be very methodical, do a lot of line watching. The last tip that I'm gonna show you, and then we're gonna call this video a day so you can get out there and catch some of these big old fish yourself, is the reason that I like to fish a leader is this right here. When I'm fishing a worm, I like to fish shallow, and they're way shallower than they think you are in the summer. When I tie my Albright knot, I like to make a little tuft right there. And when that line lays on that water, I can see that tuft. Or when that line is just up out of the water, and that fish hits it, I want to show you just the tiniest little thing. You see how big that, see how much movement that thing gets? You probably can see it against my dark shirt there. But man, when a fish hits that, I'm going to just demonstrate it. That thing just dances. When you've got a pair of polarized glasses on, I can sometimes, even in dirty water, I can see that little tuft 8, 10, 12 feet deep. So I use that a lot like a fly fisherman uses a strike indicator. So a lot of people ask me, why do I fish a leader on braid? For one, I like the fluorocarbon abrasion resistance coming across wood. I like that it doesn't cut into grass, but more than any other reason, I like that little tuft right there. I like the ability to have that strike indicator. And if you've ever been fishing with me and you're like, man, I'm fishing the same lure, I'm fishing it the same way, at the same time, in the same conditions, and Chad's catching 3 to 4 fish every time I catch one, that's probably why. That little thing right there, that little knot, that little tuft. And guys, I'll put a link in the description box to my video on how to tie the knot right version of the Albright. It's really an Albright knot with 3 half hitches. And then I take my line clippers, I cut that tip off about that tag in about 1/4 inch, and then I just skin it and flick it like a guitar pluck, and it toughs out just like that. Makes a great strike indicator. You see them before they feel you, and that's going to always put more fish in the boat. So guys, if you like these long form tip videos, do me a favor, smash that thumbs up. Takes a little bit of effort on your part, means a whole lot to me. If you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, smash that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and I will see you guys in the next video. Between now and then, do me a favor and go watch one of my other videos so that, yeah, help support the channel and see some more of this sexiness right here. Don't pan down because I'm wearing, you know, dirty shorts right now. But anyway, see y'all in the next video. You know what, guys? I almost forgot one of the most important parts of worm fishing, and I almost forgot that I owe you guys some type of giveaway built into the video. So listen, one of the most important parts of fishing any soft plastic, in my opinion, is a good scent. And my favorite scent is this new Diattract because it's a stimulant, not just an attractant, but more than anything, a scent, a natural scent, something that is going to cover your human scent from your hands touching it, touching your face, touching the sweat, the bacteria, the sunscreen, or whatever, is going to keep those fish from being repelled or offended. But if you use something that has some sensory stimulation in it, like this Diattract, it's just going to put that little bit more of a competitive advantage in your favor. So pick up your favorite scent, and don't forget to slather a little bit of that on there, or marinate your favorite bait to give it a little bit more, pun intended, a little more juice. So be sure to check out the description box. If you're new to the channel, I do a subscriber secret code down below, and the first person to do what they're supposed to do with that code will get a $50 gift certificate over at kayakbassfishing.com for some great KBF swag. And yeah, we'll keep it going, and then stay tuned for an upcoming giveaway where I give a bunch of this juice away. So yeah, Diattract, scent search technology. If that's not your favorite scent, put some type of scent on it, and you'll take your soft plastics worm fishing to the next level. Actually, I take that back. I got one more thing. With any scent, okay, if you're fishing in the heat, and this is a summer big worm fishing video, you're gonna be fishing in the heat. If you keep this thing inside of a tackle box, or inside your truck, or inside your kayak, or just sitting in the sun, be sure to aim it away from your face when you open the cap. Otherwise, it won't be good. Let's just leave it at that. So don't aim this at your face when you open it. Don't aim anything at your face when you're opening it and it's been hot outside, but especially some nasty, stanky Formula 10. Whew. Yeah, don't do it.